Testing 1, 2, test, 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 test.
What are you at, bud?
37.
I'm gonna have to change this headset out. It's really not working right.
Where's that steno thing that she was talking about?
Who was talking about?
Maren.
I didn't hear what she was saying.
She was showing about how you can
You can do it.
set your keys at various, shadow.
Oh, right. That's in, let's see. Keyboard, I think.
Just keys. There we go.
Oh, yeah. You probably got to do all that today.
Why are those like that? What does yours look like?
Let's see. Keyboard. Just.
Adjust keys on the far left. Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
Depends on what you, I shadow some things.
Oh. Didn't put my dictionary on here. Oh, I guess it looks good. It was good so far.
It's pretty good.
Bob's. There were a number of keys that I really had to pound them to get them so therefore they weren't coming up.
Oh, on his machine?
Because I had to use his. Because mine was screen too much. So
Oh, that sucks.
made editing a lot longer.
Great.
So far this looks good.
You probably had like set up generically.
I hope so. I hope I'm a generic writer. Yeah. Okay.
They use that Stennet, I think they put it in there. You know, like that theory.
I changed the view to steno outline so I can tell if I'm dropping a key or not.
Oh, right.
Looks good. How are you for sound?
Um,
Are you still high? Should we push in a button?
well, I just changed my headset.
Testing 1, 2, testing, mic check.
Good.
All right.
This hearing will come to order. Before we begin, I'd like to ask unanimous consent from the committee that the gentleman from California and former member of this committee, Mr. McNerney, be allowed to join us at the dais today and participate in today's proceedings. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the committee. I sincerely appreciate you being here on relatively short notice. And we're here today to understand how veterans are being impacted by the lapse in appropriations that has the government currently in a shutdown mode. There's plenty of blame that can be shared as to why we're in this position, but that's not why I called the hearing. I really called the hearing so that we can get the best possible information available out to the veteran community. Veterans want to know whether their disability checks and VI bill benefits will be paid in November and thereafter. They want to know if their disability claims will be decided or further delayed. Families want to know if their loved ones will receive a timely burial at VA national cemeteries. And many of VA's employees themselves want to know whether they'll be serving veterans on the job or whether they're going to be furloughed. I understand that answers to some of these questions are entirely dependent on how long this shutdown lasts. And although I want to be sure that most of us agree that we want the shutdown over quickly, it's our responsibility to ensure that the public, especially veterans, understand what the current state of play is. First of all, Mr. Secretary, I want to say that in the last couple of weeks, getting good information about your contingency plans and the effect of lapse in appropriations and its effect on veterans has been very difficult for us to get the information out of your office. For example, the original field guide that VA put out regarding the shutdown impact at first spoke of no effect on payments to veterans or processing of their benefits. But in a later version, VA stated that a prolonged shutdown would impact both, but didn't provide any details as to how it would be impacted. Secondly, the Veterans Health Administration is not shut down at all because it has received a full year's appropriation for 2014 back in March. So hospitals, clinics, and vet centers should all be open for business. Yet the President made a statement the day before the shutdown saying that veterans will find their support centers unstaffed and implied that counseling services for veterans with PTS would be affected. Third, this committee has consistently been told by VBA's mandatory overtime effort towards the backlog would actually end on September 30th. Yet days into the shutdown, we're now informed that the shutdown prevented VA's planned continued payment of overtime. Fourth, although a shutdown should have a relatively uniform effect across all regional offices, as suggested by your own field guide, my staff met with several representatives from VSOs last week who relayed that their members are hearing mixed messages out of different regional offices. And I think it goes without saying none of this is ideal. Some degree of confusion is to be expected, and we understand that. But VA employees should be worrying about VA's mission of service to veterans, not planning for furloughs or managing an agency on spare change remaining from last year. However, what can never be expected is anything less than the full truth, as best as it is known at the time. This grave situation does not need to be assisted by misleading statements from anybody, statements designed to aid a political argument by any political party, regardless of which one we may belong to. It's my hope that we can uphold the best traditions of this committee and rise above all of that today. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your willingness to join us in this effort. Since this hearing was called last Friday, we've had a little bit more clarity on some of the issues we've been asking your staff about for the last 10 days. But I thought the public should hear some of the same information. Now, one last point before I conclude. Last July, we held a hearing on a bill that the ranking member and I introduced that proposed to advance fund the entire VA discretionary budget. The administration declined to take a position on the bill, saying instead it needed to conduct a review first. It's obvious that no review is necessary given where we are today. Mr. Secretary, I sincerely hope that you are making that case with the administration, and I'll follow up with you on that point during questioning. And I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Michaud, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing today, and I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming. Before we begin exploring how the government shutdown is affecting veterans and the VA, I want to acknowledge that the very real consequences in the lapse in appropriation has had on VA employees. I know that VA employees do not work solely for a paycheck. They work because they believe in helping veterans. A lot of them are veterans, and they have done a phenomenal job, and now it's time for Congress to do its job. We can do this in two ways. Number one, either the Senate take up the Milcon VA appropriation bill that was passed by the House about 4 months ago, or the House can take up a clean CR passed by the Senate. I don't care which one that we choose, as long as we get on with the reopening of government and that we fully fund VA. The VA contingency plan and field guide provide us with a rough idea of the consequences of a government shutdown. Last week, we saw the immediate shutdown, what it had on some VA offices, such as the Inspector General. Yesterday, we saw some VBA and IT accounts run dry and thousands of VA employees furloughed. We know that the mandatory funds to pay compensation and pension benefits are scheduled to run out in a little over 2 weeks. We also know that furloughs and suspensions of programs and other agencies also affect veterans. Of the roughly 2.1 million federal employees, more than 600,000 are veterans. Many of them are already or expect to be furloughed. Also, as programs and services at other agencies are disrupted, it affects VA's ability to receive the necessary information and support to deliver those services for our veterans. We know we'll hear bad news today from you, Mr. Secretary. Important VA operations have or will be suspended. Some veterans will not get what they are expecting, what they deserve, and most importantly, what they have earned. This may be a difficult conversation, but one that we must have, openly, frankly, and honestly. But amidst the bad news, there is some good news. With VA's medical accounts under advance appropriation, the Veterans Health Administration is largely unaffected by lapse in the fiscal year 2014 appropriation. All medical facilities are open, as you heard from the chairman, and operation under normal status. This will continue regardless how long the current government is shut down. It is clear now that in the midst of the shutdown, that getting a vote on H.R. 813 as amended, the Putting the Veterans Funding First Act, is necessary and a critical step in ensuring veterans' benefits and services are not put at risk when there is a lapse in appropriation. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for signing on the letter with me to the Speaker asking that H.R. 813 as amended be scheduled for floor action. I encourage all members of the committee to sign on to that letter and to send a message that veterans should not and cannot and will not be disadvantaged by party politics in the future, regardless of which party is in control. Mr. Secretary, I look forward to your testimony and the questions to follow. And Mr. Chairman, once again, I want to thank you very much for having this very important and timely hearing today. With that, I yield back to balance my time.
Thank you, Mr. Michaud. Thank you to all the members for your attendance today. As you might imagine, this is a critical time within our government and certainly for our veterans out there. And that's why I asked the Secretary, and I am so pleased that on very short notice he was able to come in and give us some indication of where we are now within the VA and where we'll be going in the future, depending on how long this shutdown does in fact continue. I want to welcome to the table our first and only witness of this morning, the Honorable Eric Shinseki, Secretary for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Your complete written statement, Mr. Secretary, will be entered into the record, and you are recognized now for 5 minutes.
Great. Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Michaud, members of the committee, thank you for entering my written statement. Let me, Mr. Chairman, just recognize in the room here, we have partners for all of us from our veteran service organizations. I would tell you they've been quite directly helpful to me over the past 4.5 years, and trying to help us understand how to be better at our responsibilities of caring for veterans, but also service members and families and survivors that we are responsible for. Mr. Chairman, you called this hearing to examine the effect of government shutdown on VA benefits and services to veterans. And while my written testimony describes many effects on VA due to the ongoing lapse in appropriations, let me just say unequivocally that all the effects that I described and I'm going to describe of the shutdown are negative. It is an impediment to VA's ability to deliver services and benefits that veterans have earned through their service. VA continues to invest significant resources and time in planning for this unique, infrequent, and avoidable situation. The ongoing shutdown presents myriad legal and programmatic challenges. The last time a shutdown occurred in 1996, as I am told, our nation was enjoying a sustained period of relative peace. That's not true today. Today, we're in the 13th year of the war in Afghanistan, providing care and benefits to veterans of that war and the war in Iraq as well. Members of this latest generation of veterans are enrolling in VA at a higher rate than ever before. They, along with the veterans of every preceding generation, will be harmed if the shutdown continues. In brief, in the last 6 months through 30 September, the Veterans Benefits Administration, VBA, reduced the backlog of compensation claims, something we've all been working on and prodding and encouraging them to do better. Well, they've begun that delivery. 193,000 claims in the backlog reduced in the last 190 days, roughly 190 days, a 31.5% increase in about a little over 6 months. Since the shutdown began on 1 October, the backlog has stalled and, in fact, has increased by about 2,000 claims. VBA has already furloughed more than 7,800 of its employees, half of whom are veterans. The shutdown directly threatens VA's ability to eliminate the backlog. We've lost ground we fought hard to take. Roughly 1,400 veterans a day are now not receiving decisions on their disability compensation claims due to the end of overtime. If the shutdown does not end in the coming weeks, VA will not be able to assure delivery of 1 November checks to more than 5.18 million beneficiaries, and that accounts for about $6.25 billion in payments that people are expecting, and compensation and pensions and dependents and indemnity compensation, DIC, fiduciary, educational, vocational rehabilitation, and employment benefits, including veterans who are 100% disabled, surviving spouses, eligible children, orphaned by the death of their military or veteran parent. Tuition and stipends for over 500,000 veteran service members and eligible family members in education programs will also stop. These are some of the major issues veterans face if the shutdown continues. My written testimony includes details of other negative impacts to our IT initiatives, to our National Cemetery Administration, whose employees lay to honored rest those who have served this nation, to VA staff offices, and to VA employees themselves, especially those who are veterans. While some have suggested a series of many continuing resolutions or many CRs, if you will, as an approach to meeting our FY 2014 budgetary responsibilities for funding the government, that's not a solution for veterans or for our nation. The budget request submitted by President Obama nearly 6 months ago was a result of an extensive, cooperative, synchronized effort across all departments and agencies to produce a budget request that coherently balanced priorities and risks. Picking and choosing parts of government to fund would ignore two key drumbeats that I've tried to deliver over the past 4.5 years. The first is that very little of what we work on in VA originates in VA. Much of that originates in another department. And then second, VA's care for veterans, and by that I mean health care, education, employment, insurance, housing, for both the homeowner and the homeless, does not occur without significant coordination with DOD, with Housing and Urban Development, HHS, Social Security, Treasury, Education, Labor, the IRS, Small Business Administration. And frankly, it is this collaboration amongst and across the government that allows us to be effective. And I would add to that, we have a fourth mission, I think, as the chairman recalls. Besides our three administration, we have a fourth mission in the event of emergency, national disaster, humanitarian requirements that I must make available our capabilities where it is needed. And so our work with FEMA and DHS, Homeland Security, is also part of our day-to-day responsibilities. These are not insignificant connections for this department. Without them, we are less effective in serving veterans, our service members, their families, and our survivors. And so these are the facts that I present, Mr. Chairman. At a critical time for veterans, everyone at VA, as you said, should be focusing on how best to accomplish their missions. And so I ask the committee and the rest of Congress to help us by resolving this fiscal impasse now so that VA and our federal partners on whom we have to rely to do our work can get back to work full-time, fulfilling President Lincoln's call to care for those who have borne the battle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. You and I both know that regular order is not in the mode that we're in today, but regular order, in fact, requires a piecemeal approach of 12 appropriation bills. 126 plus days ago, this House, on a bipartisan basis, passed a VA military construction bill that fully funded, not just partially funded on a short-term basis, which is what folks are asking for now, is just a part of a CR, fully funded. Yet that bill languishes over in the Senate. To my colleagues who may not recall, because it's been so long that we sent that bill over to the Senate, there's very little difference, maybe 0.25% difference between the two bills. It could very easily be brought forward, and this would be off the table. And so my question is, in statement is, in years past, House and Senate, regardless of parties, and the White House have always come together and tried to find a way to prioritize how money would be spent, who would be at the top of the list as we started to shut the government down and run out of money. And today, we don't have that. Even back in the shutdown of 1995, there was a prioritization, and DOD and veterans were taken off the table, of which they're not right now. So my question, Mr. Secretary, is don't you think VA benefits certainly should get the same priority or prioritization today as it has in other shutdown situations?
I missed the last piece of your question, Mr. Chairman. In same priorities,
just basically in years past, we have in fact prioritized spending needs. DOD and VA has always been basically taken off the table. And my question is, what's different this time? And don't you think veterans benefits, in fact, should be prioritized at a higher level than others within our federal government?
Mr. Chairman, I would just tell you this department has benefited from leadership of the President and the leadership and support in the Congress. If you look at what has transpired over the last 4 years to our budgets, I think we can all be proud of what we have done to take care of veterans. And I will always tell you that that's a top priority with me. But I do understand that there is a budget request presented to the Congress. There is a process that you refer to that requires a passage of a budget, and within that, the individual departments are then provided guidance on what their budgets will be. I'm not sure where the Congress is in that process, but I would ask the Congress to provide us a budget so that not only this department, but our partners in government on whom we rely to do our mission can get on with business.
I think it's important to discuss the differences between a budget and an appropriation, because it has been conflated in the national media that because a budget hasn't been passed, we can't appropriate money. In fact, we've done it for a number of years now because we haven't been able to come to an agreement on a budget. We did pass in this House over 126 days ago now by a large bipartisan measure, and I would hope you would know or have some type of an idea of why the Senate is holding that so tight, has chosen not to move that legislation forward. We've passed 4 different full appropriation bills, and I'm hoping that maybe you can help me understand why the Senate continues not to act on the full, not a piecemeal, partial bill, but a whole funding bill.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your confidence in my ability to sort through this for the Congress. I would just claim to be just an average guy trying to do a job here. But here's what I'm facing. I didn't know there was going to be a shutdown. I had no idea that this was intended to happen. And so the month of September is, for me, the end of a fiscal year. What usually happens is I'm trying to get people to tell me how they have finished what I've instructed them to do throughout the year with the funds that the Congress has provided, generously provided, and then anticipate that I will have a budget on 1 October in which to understand how to make that transition. Because these transitions in the past have been difficult, Congress authorizes a carryover opportunity, but it limits what I can carry over. And so in one department, one administration, it may be as low as 4%. In another, it may go as high as 10%. But these are limitations. I need to understand what we are doing to close out properly so I know what our carryover is going to be so that I can understand that we're meeting Congress's intent, and then expecting that I'm going to have a budget in which to dovetail these activities into. And usually takes me about 10 days at the end of a fiscal year to be able to bring this to order. So about today is when I would have these factors coming together, and in fact, this week would have been the week that I would have my FY14 execution meetings with the various accounts. I would just tell you these factors are coming together daily, and there are adjustments here, and how much money is available, and the burn rate at which those funds will last. And so we're doing the best we can. 2 things we're doing here. We're trying to keep our operations going for as long as possible to where we're allowed by exception under the law to take care of as many veterans as we can for as long as possible. The other thing I have to do is make sure I'm taking care of our employees so that I'm not telling people that they're going to be furloughed when in fact they aren't going to be. So there is a period of time here not to be alarmist. But at an appropriate moment when we know we're not going to have a budget, we're going to have to take other steps, that we will inform our employees that they are going to be furloughed. The ones that have been furloughed, we've gone through this process. But it's not just telling them you're furloughed, close the door, and leave. We're going to get a budget here at some point, Mr. Chairman. And what I want our offices to be able to do is come back and as soon as capable, be up and running at full speed. And that requires us to close out in an orderly function. If I would, forgive me, I'll fall back to my old military experience. At the end of the day, I want everyone in a fighting position to organize for whatever might happen that night. Grenades in one location, rifles oriented in the right direction, left and right, aiming stakes, ammunition, water, and be prepared. I want us to be in the same position that when we have a budget, people go back to work and we're up at full speed, so we're taking care of veterans as quickly as we can. I don't want to spend 30 days trying to figure out how we get back to that point.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I can understand why you can't predict what the Senate will do or the House do as far as that goes. But as I mentioned in my opening statement, there are two areas we can solve this. One, the Senate can pass the full appropriation bill that we passed about 4 months ago to fund all of VA, or the House can pass a clean Senate CR that will get us, unfortunately it's still a CR, but it'll still move us beyond this particular point. And I understand your that even with the full MILCON VA appropriation bill, there are still services that veterans will not be able to receive because other parts of the federal government are not up and operating because of the shutdown, and I totally understand that, but it's my hope that the bulk of the VA could be taken care of. My question to you, Mr. Secretary, you had mentioned trying to get the staff back up and running once the shutdown is done. If, say, today that Congress and the President was able to get our act together, how long will it take the VA to get up and running full steam ahead, and when will you be able to assess some of the damages, particularly as it relates to the backlog that it'll take to try to get back on track again?
Yeah. I would say, Congressman, at this point, in some sections, hours to days in other sections, but the longer we go, then the startup will just take longer. Fact is, I've indicated on 1 November I will not be able to pay all these beneficiaries who are expecting those checks. I need the authorization, appropriations, and a budget to be able to do that. And I don't do that independently. In order to make those claims decisions, I link into IRS and Social Security, education with the Department of Education, small business. So I would say that what is best for veterans and for all of us right now is a budget for the entire federal government. Let us get back to work. The sooner we do it, the faster I get back up to full speed.
We did a couple of years ago passed advanced appropriations for the Department of VHA. What are there some components of that, even though they have advanced appropriation, that you're not able to do because of IT or some other components of the VA that would actually hinder VHA in providing the services that they need?
Yeah. Well, we've had these discussions in the past, Congressman, and you know that we're a little bit bifurcated here. We get a generosity of the Congress advance appropriations for our health administration, so they're fully funded on 1 October. So the question, how much of an impact? 80% of VA is functioning because our hospitals are open, our community-based outpatient clinics are seeing patients, as are our vet centers and our mobile clinics. And so that will continue, and the impact of them is negligible. Where we get a little bifurcated is where we have authorization to do something with a facility, and then we have to wait for our IT budget to clear, and then we marry the two up. It's something we've worked in the past. Are there easier ways to handle this? I think down the road, perhaps worthy of discussion, but for right now, that would not be able to turn on checks on 1 November, and that's my great concern here. And don't want to be alarmist, but I want to speak for the veterans who are looking in on this. not only do we have a large number of beneficiaries that are looking for those checks, I have veterans myself that I employ, a third, over 100,000 veterans. A number of them are going to be subject to furlough. And so if they are furloughed and they're also recipients of disability checks, their resources go to zero. And then I have the responsibility of trying to figure out how to keep them from becoming homeless. So this, and HUD plays in that game. So this is a much larger challenge for us.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as the chairman outlined in his opening statement recently, the House passed the Honoring Our Promise to America's Veterans Act that, if signed into law, would provide immediate funding for critical veterans benefits and services, including disability claims, education, training, and many of the items you discussed in your testimony. But you also made an important point when you stated that many services veterans rely on are not housed directly within VA, like the Vets Employment Programs, the Small Business Administration loans are two of those examples you cited in your testimony. Could you expand on other types of these programs that would be outside of that bill that we passed that is now sitting in the Senate?
You mean other departments that are impacted by it?
Impact our veterans that are outside of the VA bill.
Sure. Our claims processing requires by law our responsibility to check with the IRS for income data, with Social Security for other benefits, and so that's part of the process that we go through in completing our claims.
Are you saying then that even if the Senate passed the VA bill and the Senate were willing to sign that VA funding bill, that there would still be some challenges because of the interactivity with the IRS and their furloughs?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it depends on the issue, Congressman. It could have greater impact than in others, but the impact is there. Education, you know, whether it's 9/11 GI Bill, Montgomery GI Bill, vocational rehabilitation and employment, there are ties that go to the Department of Education. So we are not an independent operator here. Employment, veterans employment, a high priority for us and for all of you. Department of Labor plays in that. And as you indicated, Small Business Administration does play as well.
Thank you. And second question, you and I have talked several times about French Camp, a facility that borders mine and Congressman McNerney's district, affecting all of our veterans. The ongoing construction projects, can you outline what a protracted or a long delay in funding or a long delay in funding would affect both our ongoing construction projects, the staff at the VA Office of Construction and Facilities Management, or the planning for future VA construction projects?
Yeah. Congressman, if I might, I'll get back to you with specifics on French Camp, just a little more detail than I had time to brush up on. But just let me say that in the office that overwatches construction, they also have acquisition, logistics, and construction. So depending on which of those topics, they're variously affected by the shutdown. In the case of construction, for those construction activities that are underway, those will continue. Our oversight responsibilities will be reduced, but we will continue to provide oversight, you know, as best we can, ensuring that the requirements of the contract are met. Here I'm talking about 52 projects and about $12 billion of construction, and the major projects will continue. Design, on the other hand, about 20 projects may be delayed and may be significantly delayed depending on how long this process goes. And so your question about French Camp, I just need to find out exactly where we are in this process. Other aspects of this, major leasing actions, about 33 projects liable to be delayed. And here Examples would be the Greenville, North Carolina outpatient clinic, South Bend, Indiana, community-based outpatient clinic, Butler, Pennsylvania, HCC. And so, I'd like to see these uninterrupted, but there will be some delays here, and significance will be determined by how long the shutdown continues.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here with us today. And I certainly agree with your remarks on the importance of passing a complete and clean continuing resolution, and that will provide the certainty I think Americans are looking for in their government and their leaders. As you know, last week the House passed H.J. Resolution 72, which was an attempt, I think, to provide some funding for our nation's veterans in the middle of this debate that we're having. I think that clearly that particular bill, in my view, still underfunded a lot of different areas. And I wanted you, if you could, to just sort of speak to those. You've already mentioned, I think, a couple, but if you could comment a little bit more specifically around, let's say, the medical and prosthetic budget that I don't believe was funded in that resolution. You've mentioned something, I think, a little on the technology piece, the Office of the Inspector General, the grants to VA homes, grants to state cemeteries and the like. If you could comment a little bit more specifically about the impacts there.
Sure. As I indicated earlier, with advance appropriations for healthcare administration, a large portion of VA is fully funded. I would say well over 70, approximately 80% is funded, and those activities continue. There are pieces of our medical activities that don't come under advanced appropriations, and so you cited a couple. Research is another area, and so those activities would stop until we had a full budget.
Thank you. And just to follow up on an area I don't think we've spoken too much about so far, having to do with the GI Bill and what that will mean to veterans who are enrolled in colleges and universities across the country. Does that mean that they can't continue, they need to drop out? How are we going to handle that?
Yeah. So what I would say here is that the two accounts I'm dealing with. One is the carryover appropriations of money that were not expended in 13. This carryover in the Benefits Administration, I think roughly $40 million, was used to keep that office open as long as possible to take care of all the various categories of claims, education among them, disability, pension compensation, vocational rehab, and education claims. That money was exhausted on 7 October, so on the 8th we furloughed over 7,800 of the workforce in the Benefits Administration. We still have about 13,000 people working because we have, under the law, declared them accepted, and they're accepted because in the other account, the mandatory funding account, which currently has money in it, but that will end before the end of the month. And so we have these folks processing claims, and where it's appropriate to make a decision today and pay today, retroactive claims, for example, to pay that back pay, if you will, we are doing that. But every payment we make reduces the amount of mandatory funds, and before the end of the month, this account will be exhausted. At that point, these 13,000 or so people who are doing this will have no reason to continue to function, because the necessary implication clause that allows them to work will be exceeded when the mandatory account is exhausted. And at that point, they will be furloughed, and our Veterans Benefits Administration will be reduced to, something over 1,000, maybe less than 1,500 folks who will continue to operate in our 56 regional offices and our call center. And the reason for that is every veteran who submits a claim, we're required to accept it, date stamp it so there is a place in line for them to be recognized when funding is restored. For education claims, students who are currently in school, and as those come up, we will pay those like we do the retroactive claims. But at some point, that's a draw on the mandatory account, and that will end before the end of this month, and I will be required to furlough a large portion of that 13,000 workforce.
Thank you, sir. And again, I appreciate you being here. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brownlee. Mr. Runyon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary. Thanks again for your testimony. Kind of answered a couple of my questions over there, but what is the last day of this calendar month that you can process all award payments for timely receipt on the first of the month?
Yeah, it's again, it'll be later this month, towards the end of the month. The exact day is going to be determined by, pardon the term, the burn rate here. And once the mandatory account is no longer solvent, then we'll stop. But we're processing claims as fast and as hard as we can, as we were before 1 October. To ensure that we get as many of those claims ready to be paid as soon as the budget is provided. And that's the description I give our folks about setting up your fighting position. When the budget is provided, we go to work and we start, paying benefits.
Has there been any discussion within your department and or your staff on prioritization of claims, i.e. fully disabled, that type of thing, as you get near that deadline come the first of the month?
Well, there are a good portion, I would say over 400,000 100% disabled veterans who will be affected by our inability to deliver checks on 1 November. 5 million beneficiaries, over 5 million, 5.18 million, I think is a closer number. But there are a good portion of them, as I indicated, who are 100% disabled. And amongst them, there will be survivors, surviving spouses, children orphaned by the death of their service member or veteran parent.
But there's been no discussion of priority there. You're just doing it as they go through the process.
While we're operating at, while we have the funds to operate, we do prioritize in our processing of claims for financially challenged veterans or claimants, Medal of Honor recipients, former prisoners of war, terminally ill. And then we add to that fully developed claims because they're easier to process. But in the processing business, that is where we give priority, and then we work, the remainder of the claims. And I would say in September, we produced the biggest production output since I've been here, 128,000 claims. But once it goes into the payment process, Congressman, then there is a sequence that goes along with how they're been put in line.
Going to hopefully when we get out of this mess, obviously chairing the DAMA subcommittee here, dealing with the claims is is a project. Can you provide information on VBA's funding and the future plans for use of mandatory overtime to address the backlog? Mandatory use in the future to attack the backlog.
Mandatory overtime?
Yeah.
You know, we use mandatory overtime, and it's a device that's been used over the last several years when we see an opportunity and we want to get more production because for some reason we've gotten a little, you know, behind. And so in May, we declared we were going to do this until the end of the year. Our 2014 budget has $50 million in it for overtime. And that's essentially what I was counting on 1 October to be able to transition to that. So we do have a plan. We do need that piece of the budget recognized so we can resume our overtime option. Part of what as we began to close out the year, before we knew that a shutdown was going to occur, and as we were trying to assess how much carryover we were going to have, we thought we were going to be able to carry over $40 million to apply, to add to the $50 million that's in the budget. So to give us, you know, a good run at the year of additional overtime. So the numbers would be up there, you know, closer to $100 million, $90 million or so. That $40 million was used to keep our operation going for as long as possible to get as many claims lined up before the end of the month.
Well, thank you for that, because we had a hearing about some difficulty with legislative affairs a couple weeks back and have had issues with getting an answer like that from them, so I appreciate that and yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Runyon. Ms. Kirkpatrick, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. One of the important projects that the VA has been working on is the transition to a paperless system for claims benefit processing. And yet in your written testimony, you say on Monday, 2,764 OIT employees were furloughed, and then the 7,800 VBA employees furloughed yesterday. Would you describe for me and for our committee what impact those furloughs are going to have on that transition to the paperless system right now? Give us a snapshot right now this week, and then what it looks like if this shutdown continues into November.
Yeah. Very important question. Congresswoman, as you know, we have set a long-term goal of ending the backlog in 2015. Key to that has been the automated system we put into place, and we finished fielding that 6 months ahead of schedule in June. That's fielding the sort of the basic model. And much like any IT operation, you have, you know, newer versions that add capability, give you more robustness, and then reduce the workload. So all of those plans that have been in place, we've had to put a hold on. There is no new development work being done for VVMS, and there is much to be done if we're going to get this up to where we expected we would have it, to be able to hold our target of ending the backlog in 2015. I haven't given up on that. I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity here to get back on track. But the longer we go, more difficult that becomes. What I would like to assure you, though, is that I am allowed by the rules to maintain what we have. I can't add, I can't make it better, I can't increase capability, but I can and will maintain the operation. So if computers are having problems, I have, you know, sufficient workforce to be able to bring them back online.
But basically what you're saying is any progress in that project has come to a screeching halt.
That's correct.
And let me just ask you, Secretary, you are a general with an outstanding distinguished combat record, and you know, Congress voted to pay federal employees when the shutdown ends, so they're going to be paid. Does it make any sense to you to not allow them to work?
I can't think of many, and they are ready to work. They are, I would just, refer to the folks in the Benefits Administration who have brought this backlog down, 193,000 claims in about 190 days. Lots of folks wondered whether we were going to be able to do it. VBMS will be important to that effort, but VBMS is just coming online. So all of this work was done by good folks in the Benefits Administration. I would speak for them. They're disappointed that the ground they gained is being lost day by day.
Well, I just want to thank you for your leadership under the department, and thank your employees for their good hard work. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind my colleague that only the House has passed a bill that would allow for furloughed workers. The Senate continues to hold fast in not helping us resolve this particular situation. Dr. Benishek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I, like all my colleagues, would like to see this shutdown put behind us as soon as possible. And frankly, wish that the appropriation process went on in regular order, that we would have passed the appropriate appropriations for all of the segments of our government. I'm happy that the House has passed the military construction and VA bill in a bipartisan fashion, and hope that the Senate acts on that. And frankly, I think that the entire government should be funded in that usual fashion, and that this policy of continuing resolution is just a bad policy. But nevertheless, I understand that we have to get something done. I had a couple of questions about the communication between the VA and the committee here. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that apparently the department issued a notice in late September that 95% of VA employees would be either fully funded or exempted from furloughs. Is that incorrect?
I would ask for the opportunity to go and retrieve whatever this announcement you're referring to, but I would say that if you look at VA as a whole, 90% of us are in VHA, and they are fully funded. And so as of 1 October, our hospitals are seeing patients, community-based outpatient clinics are operating. So if this is the 95% that's being referred to, I would say I can understand why that information was provided. But again, Congressman, trying to close out 13 and understanding what kind of resource capability we're going to have, expecting that we're going to have a budget on 1 October, knowing that VHA had a budget because it was passed last year through the advanced appropriations provision that you all have provided. So I think the 95% here is referring to VHA because of advanced.
Yeah, okay. And frankly, I tend to agree with you on the advanced funding issue. Frankly, I don't see why we don't have 2-year budgeting for everything. Allow us more time to get this appropriations done. But the president on September 30th indicated that some PTSD counseling would be affected by the shutdown. Is that true?
I would say we are open for business at VA, and I believe, as I've said, we have ties to other departments. The IHS and HHS, the Indian Health Service. We have veterans being served there who, if those operations are not funded, are not being seen for any variety of requirements, PTSD being one.
All right. Okay.
Alaskan natives that who are veterans that we provide services through either the consortium there or through IHS are probably not being seen. So, and that's why I say we can focus on VA as long as we understand that there's a broader.
Right, and understand that the cooperation with other departments is going to be hindered by this situation. There's no medical centers that being shut down though, right? There's no, all the C box are going to be open. That's correct, is that right?
There is one that's affected, and that is the North Chicago Lovell Healthcare Center. It's a joint initiative between the United States Navy and VA. It operates off a joint account in which we each contribute dollars. So that is affected.
Why is that being affected? I mean, I thought we funded, the president signed a bill that funds the military.
The authorization to continue to fund that is the issue. However, we have accepted all of the civilian staff, accepted meaning that they will continue to work, continue to see service members and veterans and families, and then we'll look for an opportunity then to make right their compensation.
Well, I know I would really like to get this behind us, and I take this opportunity to urge my Senate colleagues to come to the table and let's get this figured out. So thank you very much. I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benishek. Ms. Custer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Secretary Shinseki, for being with us today. My question has to do with the vet centers and the services that in my district in New Hampshire are particularly valuable, the counseling, the group therapy, and just having a place to go. And I'm just wondering where this falls in the shutdown.
All 300 centers will continue to operate. They are covered under the Health Administration's appropriation, so they are funded for the year.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question has to do with the November 1st payments. Could you give us a more accurate sense here? I mean, we very much want a clean continuing resolution, get the country back to work, get the government back to work. But each day that goes by seems to be critical in this. Is there, I would imagine, with the number of checks that go out, there's a process and a procedure that takes a period of time. Could you give us a sense, you've talked about the end of the month, could you give us a sense of the number of days that a delay in reopening the government would cause a delay in those payments being received after the 1st of November?
Sure. If the mandatory account, it's the account against which I am writing checks, so to speak, processing claims and having them ready to be executed. But as that account has demands written against it, it is exhausted at some point before the end of the month. And the reason I can't be more specific is the rate at which I'm able to do this. But at before the end of the month, the mandatory account will not support payments in November, even though I have checks, lined up to draw against it. I think I indicated $6.25 billion of requirements, and I'll be down to about $2 billion, and if I can't pay it all, it stops. And so on 1 November, right now, unless I can provide mandatory funding to make the account solvent again, 1 November, I will not be sending checks out.
And could you give us a sense of the scope of that, the types of people whose lives will be irreparably harmed, and sort of the categories and the numbers of that devastation?
I think I gave sort of a rough population here of 5.18 million beneficiaries, and these are compensation payments, these are pension payments, these are education payments, and vocational rehabilitation and employment payments as well. And within this category are veterans. They're also service members, because we have active duty members who participate in some of our programs. We have surviving spouses and children who've lost parents.
And I know you can't speculate as to people's lives, but would you say that these are people that generally don't have a lot of savings to fall back on, that missing this type of disability check or this type of compensation check could really set them back.
You know, our eligibility for VA benefits is usually income-based, and so I would say that a large portion of the beneficiaries we service are lower waged and are in need of our help. There will be those who, by virtue of the severity of their combat injuries, will qualify because of that. But by and large, our patient population is older, sicker, and in need of support.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back my time. I appreciate you coming today, and I hope that your testimony will cause all of us to redouble our efforts to get the government back to work service.
Mr. Secretary, did I hear you say that disability is income-based, disability ratings?
No, I said there are some, because of, by virtue of the severity of their disabilities, come in at a higher category here.
So
But in the lower categories,
people with shaving bumps or sleep apnea or hemorrhoids or all those disabilities that are out there today, they get that regardless of the income, correct?
well, Mr. Chairman, you're getting into some detail here that I probably want to give you a better answer for.
Okay.
I would just tell you that
And
I'll do my best to answer your questions on some of those issues. But 1 November, no mandatory account, 5.18 million beneficiaries do not receive checks. And in response to the Congresswoman's question, a large portion of them are our compensation or our beneficiary checks are crucial to their being able to have order in their lives.
Mr. Huelskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity, and I really find this a difficult question to ask you, Mr. Shinseki, given the discussion we've had. But do you think Senator Reid doesn't like our veterans or the VA in particular? And it is a tough question. The reason I ask that, Mr. Secretary, is that as the chairman has indicated, 127 days ago, the U.S. House passed the appropriations. 105 days ago, the Appropriations Committee actually sent it to the floor of the U.S. Senate. And for 105 days now, Senator Harry Reid has refused to bring the appropriations to a vote in the U.S. Senate. Have you visited with the senator and asked him, could you please, Mr. Reid, bring that to a vote in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, Mr. Huelskamp, I'm happy to answer the question about Senator Reid personally. I think he very highly values veterans. As to why we are unable, Congress is unable to do its business, I will leave to the members to discuss.
Okay. Well, and I appreciate that. And you mentioned Congress, but it is a issue in the U.S. Senate. And have you visited with the senator and see if the appropriations? I'll note I've been disappointed in the House that 4 out of 12 appropriations bill is all we've passed through the U.S. House, and that includes the year budget. That means 8 out of 12 have not passed here, but 12 out of 12 have not passed in the U.S. Senate, and that's been the case now since 2009. Is there any indication in your visits with the senator that they would consider at least passing your appropriations, Mr. Shinseki? And I appreciate the work you've done to continue to meet the needs of our veterans in this shutdown period.
Yeah. To your specific question, have I visited Senator Reid over this? I would answer, I have not.
Okay.
It is not something that I would ordinarily do. I deal with this committee and with the appropriate committee in the Senate when it comes to my budget, and that's where the work is done.
And I haven't compared the budget that came out of the Senate Appropriations Committee compared to what came through the House by a pretty wide margin, and hopefully it would meet your needs. I would encourage perhaps that conversation to take place. I would ask you specifically about cemeteries. Are all your cemeteries still open and for business, and would they be impacted in late October like you have indicated for other programs?
Yeah, Congressman, it's a great question. I will tell you that our operations will continue. At some point here in the next days to weeks, we will expend our carryover monies for NCA, and we will be furloughing a good portion of the force. However, our cemeteries will go into a modified burial schedule, which means we will continue taking care of families and burying our honored, but it won't be at the rate that we had planned or would like. Our cemeteries will be open for our normal hours, which is sunrise to sunset. You may see some of our maintenance standards go a bit because we won't be able to maintain the high standards we would like to have, but that's all retrievable once we have a budget. But the focus here is on taking care of families on the most painful day for them and making sure they feel that their veteran is respected and has been accorded dignified burial.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that assurance and your current work to make sure that's available for our veterans and obviously their families as well. I mean, you've seen the images of other federal places and locations that have been barricaded to our veterans, but I want to make certain we keep the cemeteries open, and appreciate your work in doing that and making certain that does occur. And I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it does go without saying that we all care about the veterans of this country. And what we do have is a failure to communicate, negotiate, and there has been a breakdown in the institutional process of how appropriation bills are, in fact, passed through both houses of Congress. If I'm not mistaken, I think the VA Milcon bill that has been passed out of the House only had 4 dissenting votes. So suffice it to say that it was an extremely bipartisan piece of legislation. Mr. Waltz, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to echo that. I'd like to give the gentleman 30 seconds to apologize, Senator Reid, if he'd like to do that. That's beneath this Congress and certainly beneath this committee on questioning someone's commitment to veterans. We may have differences on policy and ideology. We certainly don't have differences on love of this country. So I would give my 30 seconds to the gentleman if he wishes to claim it.
Thank you, Mr. Walls. And I was asking the question, given that it's very clear, as the chairman's indicated, that Senator Reid controls the counter and has the opportunity to move that bill to the floor. And since this shutdown has occurred, unless there were some recorded votes yesterday, we've had 7 days in which there's been not a single.
I reclaim my time. Disappointed, to say the least. I hope that goes on record. One of the things I would say about this is this committee, and I'm incredibly proud to serve on it, is a place, one of the few places that still works in Congress. The collaboration in here is incredible. The work that's done down to the granular level by subcommittees actually have power, and that's a testament to you, Mr. Chairman, that you give that power to people. And I sat in this very chair arguing and making the case for advanced appropriations on VHA with my colleagues, and we did that. That was progress. We've sat here and made progress. You know, Mr. Secretary, the work you've done, I'm incredibly proud of it, and I've said it time and time again. I'm your staunchest supporter, but your harshest critic. When you get it wrong and something happens in Pittsburgh, we bring it up here and we discuss it and we figure out how to make it better. And the conscience that sits behind you representing millions of veterans expects that of us. And it still works. And what's so disappointing about this is, and what's so disappointing when we get into this, we're wasting valuable time and resources by a self-inflicted wound that should be going towards our veterans. And it is so frustrating. And what happens, and I appreciate my colleagues on this, but here's what happens. It starts to be cancerous into this committee. Last week, when the bill came up on the veterans to try and do a mini CR and to try and make the case, be very clear about this. That you're trying to find ways, and I respect that, but in that bill, and Mr. Runyon was out in Preston and held a field hearing and made a great case for a veterans cemetery that's been needed for decades in southern Minnesota. There's a grant process that you administer, Mr. Secretary, that ranked us #1. 3 weeks ago, we got that notice, and there was a thank you from thousands, 56,000 veterans in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa that were going to get that. Last week's bill zeroed that out. Now, I know you didn't do that on purpose to stick it in the eye of my veterans, but I can't support that. But within 180 seconds of my vote, the campaign committee on the Republican side sent out an attack that I don't support veterans by not doing that. There's lots of reasons to tell people not to vote for me. Not supporting veterans isn't one of them. We've worked as partners to get that right. And that's where we get the point where people's disgust, people's anger, people's frustration, we can come together. And the continuous going back and forth, the continuous question, I don't question a single person's commitment to our veterans of love of their country. I think you're wrong on some of the policies. This is the place to debate that. Not a martial law rule that goes to the floor with no amendments so the campaign committees can send out an attack ad and try and win an election while veterans are sitting at home saying, why do I hate Congress? Do I need to see any more proof? So, Mr. Secretary, I'm frustrated you're here. I appreciate you trying to go at this. I understand where some of the questions is going, that this wouldn't just be so bad if you just prioritize differently and pick the stuff I like and not the other stuff. But the questions I were going to ask, you answered. Interagency collaboration is breaking down. That is incredibly important. It helps move forward. IT, and as it impacts electronic medical records that we fought together for 7 years, I've been sitting here trying to get that right. That progress is going backwards. So I don't really have any questions for you. I trust that you, and the thing I would say about this is, the comment that we shouldn't be talking about furloughs or whatever, the VA is an organization of people. Furloughs are the most critical issue in that. There's a reason that VA healthcare is the best in the world. It's because of the people. And when those people have uncertainty, those people are laid off, those people are not there, it can impact. That's why we advanced appropriated. But you know it yourself. Mr. Runyon asked a beautiful question. I'm in 100% agreement with him. Not having the IT budget advanced appropriated has a beautiful MRI machine unhooked in New Jersey that can't help patients in some cases. Brought that up. That doesn't make any sense. And we should be today talking about that. And I compliment and end with the chairman and the ranking member have approached this the right way. The fix to this and the way to remove veterans, and we anticipated 3 years ago when we did advanced appropriations, remove veterans from this fight. Don't allow people to grandstand and use them as pawns, and continue the work to go forward. Their suggestion on the advanced appropriation on the full VA funding is the way to go. And with that, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waltz. If I can ask the committee's indulgence for just 1 second and recognize Ms. Kirkpatrick for a introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to welcome to the committee Mr. and Mrs. Somers, who are in the back of the room. Their son Daniel, an Arizona veteran, committed suicide earlier this year. We're going to be doing a roundtable with them in this committee room at 1:30. And so I just wanted to acknowledge their presence in committee. Welcome, and invite everybody to participate in the roundtable at 1:30.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Patrick. We welcome the Somers to the committee room and to Congress. We certainly add our condolences to you and thank you for your son's service, and we are extremely sorry for your loss. With that, Mr. Amadei, you are recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, going back to the cemetery thing for just a second, under the heading of triage until something changes, do your present procedures allow, on a case-by-case basis, if there is private funding available, to go ahead and either compensate the VA personnel at cemeteries to perform burials in a timely manner? Is there anything that would prevent, if somebody said, listen, we want to pay the expense to go ahead and do this in the normal instead of warehousing people? Is there an ability, or is there anything that prohibits that from happening?
Congressman, I'm not aware that there is anything that prohibits that. But again, we, try to serve all the veterans that come to us in as equitable a manner as we can, at least the appearance of equal treatment. And so just let me research that and come back to you. What I will tell you is we continue our burial operations. just at a rate less than we're accustomed to. Last year, 122,000 veterans were laid to rest.
Well, and
Highest
I appreciate
production.
that. I'm just saying, if an instance develops somewhere in the country at a cemetery where somebody says it's going to be a few weeks, and they say, we'll go ahead and incur the expense, or somebody comes forward and says, we will incur the expense to have it happen in 3 days from now or something like that, it's not something, or I guess my question that you'll get back to me on is there's nothing that prohibits an infusion of funds from a non-appropriated private source to allow somebody to do that in whatever the customary manner is in the instance.
Congressman, my guess is if it were permitted, I would be doing it now. My guess is that these are funded positions, and people have been put on furlough because of the law. And I want to be careful here that I don't suggest that we have ways to work around it, but I will take a look at it.
Well, and I'd appreciate when you look at it, make very certain it is at no cost to the government, so it's reimbursement for whatever the costs are. So if furloughed people have to be brought back at non-government expense, then there better be a pretty long opinion that says, no, we will not allow somebody to pay our folks to inter these people in the normal course of events, whatever that expense may be. And with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
May I just
Yes,
conclude
Mr.
this
Secretary.
thought, Mr. Chairman? I would say that the law directed furlough, and it's less the cost, but it's the decision that drove us to do this, and I want to be sure that I'm clear on the law before I answer you. It's less how much it costs. I think there is a requirement for me here to be in compliance.
Well, then, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to that, I think there is also a requirement for you to look at the overall mission, which is bigger than the law. So when you look at those laws, I get the furlough. I just want to make sure that everything in VA is looked at so that those trying to be interred in a cemetery get the full benefit of all the laws before the little situation that we're in now.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
I'm happy to do that.
And Mr. Secretary, I know we're still in a very fluid situation, but we reached out and asked, we were talking about PTS and Indian Health Service and whether or not they could get their health provided there. It says employees at the Indian Health Service, which provide direct health service to tribal citizens, will largely be unaffected by the shutdown, and that they would continue to provide direct clinical health care services as well as referrals for contract services that cannot be provided through their clinics. So, again, we're just somewhat confused as to the comment that was made in regard to post-traumatic stress, which I think everybody on this committee is very concerned with. And I get it. Your statement that you came in here with today paints the worst possible picture that's out there. But in your statement, it does not talk about the hundreds of thousands of VA employees that are still working and the health care that's provided. So we just want to be honest with the questions and the comments that are provided. I'm not saying that you were not. I'm just saying that there was an inference earlier on that veterans with post-traumatic stress would not, in fact, get their treatment. And we're finding that there appears to be no corner anywhere in which they will not have that treatment provided to them. Mr. O'Rourke, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for the presentation and your answers and responses to our questions and statements so far. I think they've been helpful. I wanted to add to a comment you made about the VA and veterans being dependent on other federal departments and agencies that may or may not be funded in a piecemeal, mini continuing resolution approach. I want to note that there are nearly 600,000 veterans who work for the federal government, and that constitutes nearly 30% of the entire federal workforce. So these men and women who've served our country, who are being furloughed or who are working without a clear idea of when they're being paid, are being hurt regardless of what we're able to do when it comes to funding the VA and the different agencies and departments within the VA. That's especially important to me as a representative for El Paso, Texas, where we have the 5th highest concentration of federal employees of any community in the country. 43,000 people that I represent work for the federal government. And, if that 27% holds true, well over 10,000 of them our veterans who are being affected by this current shutdown. So I think it adds to the point that you made that we cannot afford to look at this on a piecemeal basis. And when I look at the options to get out of this, I want to, in the spirit of cooperation, join my colleagues in urging the Senate and our federal government to move forward on advanced funding for military construction and veterans affairs. I think that's critical. In the short term, I think our best option is what everyone refers to as a clean funding bill or a clean CR that funds all of your services and programs and personnel at a sustainable level. The piecemeal approach that we saw last week, and I appreciate those who wanted to address the issue that way, but it had $0 for medical and prosthetic research, no funding for the National Cemetery Administration, no money for general administration, information technology, at a point where we're trying to get veterans who want to file fully developed claims to do that online, because when they do that, their wait time, which is now 450 days in El Paso, comes down under 100 days. And if we're not funding IT, we're not helping them to get the response that they need and that they deserve and that they've earned. Construction on major projects and on minor projects is zeroed out, as are grants to state VA homes and to state cemeteries. That's why I support a clean funding bill, no strings attached. Let's fund the entire federal government, perhaps on a short-term basis where we can work out some larger deal. That, to me, is the quickest, cleanest way to help everyone involved, especially our veterans. And I think that's why presidents and leaders of national veteran service organizations have come out against a piecemeal approach. They want to see us tackle this comprehensively. I know that's what you are trying to do, and I think that's what ultimately all of us want to do. To add to those national VSOs, we reached out yesterday to our local VSOs, said I'm going to have a chance to ask questions of the Secretary, would like to know what you want me to ask. And much of it you've already addressed. Timothy Blodgett of the DAV, Post 165, says the VBA budget is just as important as the VHA budget. And I think we all agree with that, and we want to see that that moves forward. David Nevadas of the American GI Forum is concerned about an issue that you brought up. What happens if the shutdown persists and we have veterans who are now in homes who are homeless? Will you have the resources to take care of them? Richard Britton, Vice Commander of the American Legion, talks about shutdown exacerbating problems that veterans already have. David Garcia, Commander of the DAV, Post 187, talks about veterans who are recipients of VA and Social Security benefits having a really hard time after November 1st. And then Kay Davis, President of Veterans of Foreign Wars, actually came up with a solution. Her solution was term limits for members of Congress if we're unable to figure this problem out. But the frustration and the questions really are not with you, they are with us, and with the need to respond to this in a way that will get the government up and running, functioning again for all departments, because veterans work in all of them, for all veteran services because veterans are impacted by all of them. And again, from my perspective, the quickest, cleanest way to do this, and we could have the government up and running tonight, is to vote for a clean funding bill. So, Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for your presence today, for answering our questions and commenting on our statements. My time is up, so I'll yield back to the chairman, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufman. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and also thank the men and women that work. I'd like to thank the men and women who work for your department to take care of those who have made so many sacrifices in defense of our freedom. My question goes to the 4 hospitals that are under construction by the VA. And VA contingency plan states that certain, quote, major construction and facilities management support functions will be suspended, unquote, during the shutdown. What has been the status of the 4 ongoing major projects in Aurora, Las Vegas, Orlando, and New Orleans during the shutdown?
Congressman, I indicated that where we have work underway on site, that work will continue. Our administrative oversight responsibilities will be diminished, but we will exercise those responsibilities. Payments to contractors, and therefore payments to the subs, an administrative process that will be slowed. But in time, payment will be made. We just don't have the folks to do that as robustly as we would like. But in terms of site work with supervision, that will continue in those locations you described.
Mr. Secretary, as you know, the payment has already been, the process has already been very slow, according to a GAO report that came out in April. What in terms of these setbacks that you talk about, will they affect, in your view, the completion date and the budget totals for each project for these 4 major hospitals?
Our work is slowed. The longer this goes, we do. I would be concerned that we begin to affect the end of the project, that we continue to slide project execution to the right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to associate myself with the remarks with the gentleman from Texas, Mr. O'Rourke. I think he stated very clearly my sentiments about what needs to be done to clean CR. And I also want to thank the chairman for the tone he set for this committee. Very bipartisan sentiments. I think you, Mr. Chairman, understand that each of us on this committee, regardless of party, have a deep and sincere commitment to our nation's veterans. So I thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. Let me also state that, you know, beyond the bipartisan bill that we passed on MILCON veterans, even the Budget Control Act of 2011 reflects that bipartisan spirit in the fact that it exempted the Veterans Administration from sequestration cuts. And it's my belief that, it's my conjecture that what is happening in the Senate and the holdup with consideration of this bill has to do with the complexities of sequestration and the divisions that are occurring between our two sides. I mean, there's a reluctance to pass all the appropriations bills until we see in toto what we're dealing with in terms of whether we're going to, how we're going to have to deal with that limit, whether we're going to lift it or some negotiations going to happen over that. We need to get to negotiations on the bigger picture. I cherish this committee. I cherish being on it because it is one corner of the Congress that is still functional. And I want to fight fiercely to keep that spirit, and I thank the chairman for the small ways in this committee that he's tried to keep that alive. And I yield back to balance my time. I have to get back to a meeting in my office.
Thank you very much. Looks like Dr. Winstrup is gone. Mr. Bilirakis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony, General. General, let's summarize again. I walked in just a little late in your statement, but which programs I understand because of legislation that we passed, the VA, the healthcare, the outpatient clinics, the hospitals, the CBOCs are protected. Is that correct? They will not be impacted. But tell me which programs will be impacted because of due to the shutdown. I think our constituents have a right to know, and if you could briefly summarize, I'd appreciate it very much.
Congressman, the Veterans Health Administration, because of its special opportunity to have advanced appropriations, courtesy of the Congress, is funded. And so that's hospitals, medical centers, hospitals, vet centers, community-based outpatient clinics, and every version of healthcare center in between.
No exception, correct?
No.
No exception. They will be funded.
The only exception where there is impact is the North Chicago, where I say it is operating, but it's in an accepted category. Everyone else in the VA system is fully funded.
Okay, thank you very much. Which programs will be impacted, in your opinion? and if you can give me some deadlines. I know we went through a lot of this, but I'd like for you to summarize.
Yeah,
for our
well,
constituents.
all the other programs that are not advanced funded are impacted and being impacted. And some of this is the degree to which and when they're going to be impacted is a function of how much 2013 residual carryover funds we have available. A device that the Congress authorizes, certain percentages that we are allowed to use as carryover to transition between budget years. But if this continues, every one of our departments will be impacted. We have a requirement in the Benefits Administration, even if we have expended the mandatory account and therefore have no necessary implication, this is one of the clauses for exception, to keep people working. At that point, there will be a significant requirement to furlough workforce who will be working until the end of this month, towards the end of this month. Thereafter, we will have roughly 1,000 folks operating in the 56 regional offices to ensure that we can receive, account, date stamp, and control claims that will continue to be submitted, both through the normal process and through the call center. So there are people working in the call center as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yield back. Thank you, General.
Mr. Negrete McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I know that you said that the VA not only deals with the VA, but other departments also. And so those veterans receiving educational benefits and stipends under the GI Bill and that are attending school now, because school has already started at various institutions, what will happen after November the 1st? You know, if they won't get their money, have you talked to the colleges, the institutions, the universities?
Congresswoman, we are doing everything we can while we have mandatory funds available. At least two accounts that, two categories that we will expend money to cover immediately. One is the retroactive aspects of a claim. So someone who is due money for previous authorization up until this point, to the best of our ability, we pay those. And for students currently in school, we pay those as well. But that draws down this mandatory account I'm speaking about. So on 1 November, before the end of this month, it'll be in a situation where I can no longer pay. And the 1 November payments that should be going out will not be able to do that unless more mandatory funding is provided. So it's, if there is funding in the mandatory account, which has got to come through appropriation, then I can accept people to continue to work to draw that down. Without that, by law, I have to furlough these folks.
So what happens to students that are already in classes, that have already started the semester or the quarter, whichever they're on?
Well, at this point, this is a crucial question because for students who have already registered and had their tuition and fees paid up front, I think they're going to be okay. And if they have drawn their book stipend, then I think they're probably covered. Every situation is different. But I will not be able to pay the monthly housing stipend. And that would be an issue.
Have the schools or the universities or the colleges made any kind of, I'm sure they're aware of our shenanigans here. So.
Well, I can assure you we've reached out to schools and doing the best we can to get their support and cooperation to be able to carry this for payment. but the schools are not involved in the housing stipend. That's directly from VA to the student, so that is an issue. And I would tell you that in my past experience, the schools have been quite cooperative, but there are 6,000 of them, and so we want to be sure that, we have contacted all of them.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walorski. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Mr. Secretary. You had mentioned earlier the South Bend CBOC would be delayed. We were notified more than 4 weeks ago. There was already a delay in the South Bend CBOC. So my question is, it obviously has nothing to do with this government shutdown. So would your plan then be to expedite that CBOC once the furloughed workers are back? And if something was delayed prior to a shutdown, that it would be expedited after a shutdown?
Yeah, we'll do our best to get back on schedule. It was going slower than we would like, but this has just exacerbated the situation. But our effort will be to get all of these projects back online as soon as we can.
And then my second question, I appreciate that. My second question is, according to the most recent Monday morning report, the Indianapolis Regional Office has 11,460 claims pending. Has nothing to do with the government shutdown. This is prior to the shutdown. And these claims are taking an average of 402 days to complete. Over a year still in the state of Indiana to process these claims. So my first question is there an urgent plan when these furlough workers come back to deal with these hot spots in the country? And number two, if this furlough plan retroactive Fairness Act is signed by the president, are your employees coming back to work the next morning?
I don't know about the next morning, but as soon as they're notified, we expect that they'll be in promptly.
And then what would the plan be for high impact areas like Indiana with 11,000 veterans by no fault of their own, no fault of a government shutdown, sitting for over a year still waiting for claims to be mitigated on their behalf?
Yeah, well, Congresswoman, again, I think you recall we have made decisions that created an increase in the inventory and increase in the backlog, and we predicted 3 years ago that backlog would sort of hit the high point this year, and it did on 25 March. Since that time, we prioritized claims that are older than 2 years. That essentially 99% of those are done. Claims that are 1 year of age or older, we're well into the 80% of taking that down from like 300,000 down into the double digits here. I'll have to look at Indianapolis and see what the issues are. But they would be in this prioritization that we've been in. Anything older than 1 year, we intended to have done here before the end of this year. And we're on a track to do that, and like to get back on it.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I will apologize, if some won't, for the inappropriate attempt by people to drag you into the politics of this unfortunate situation. I'm the ranking member of the Disability Assistance Subcommittee, and I carefully monitor those Monday morning reports. I guess we won't be able to get those now because of this unnecessary shutdown. And I'm optimistic about the strides you've made. We've heard in that committee about the 80% of the 1 year backlog, the 99% of the 2 year backlogs. I think it's remarkable progress, and it's just a crying shame that some of that is going to now be pushed back because of this shutdown. We've spoken a number of times about what's happening in the Reno office, which serves Las Vegas. It also has very long waiting periods, but we've addressed some of that. General Hickey has been out to visit. That's kind of in process and making some progress. There's still a long way to go. But I've been hearing some conflicting reports about the closing of the regional offices. Some closed, some not. Could you kind of go into some detail about how that choice is being made, or what's happening in those regional offices during this shutdown?
Yeah. Congresswoman, I sort of laid out a timeline here that I have roughly at the Benefits Administration, just round figures, about 20,000 people Nearly 8,000 of them have been furloughed 2 days ago. The remaining 13,000 continue to work because there are mandatory funds available in the account, and I continue to draw down on that. At the point that mandatory account is depleted before the end of this month, that will happen. At that point, I have no necessary implication to continue to have this workforce present. And at that point, we will be forced to furlough these individuals. The law requires it. Beyond that, we will keep a small workforce present. My understanding is all the regional offices and the National Call Center will have presence in order to receive claims, date stamp claims, and control that property for the veterans who have made the effort to submit them. But it will be a much reduced operation, receipt only and no processing.
But you won't be making choices, say, between the Waco office and the Reno office or the Indianapolis office. It's going to be across the board.
That's correct.
And if somebody walks in, will there be someone there to receive a claim? They just won't be able to get information about the progress of their claim? Is that basically how it will work?
I will say yes, the claims can be submitted. I will have, by location, we are in facilities that are run by the General Services Administration, and merely walking in, I will have to find out exactly how that goes. But we are not sole occupants of many of the regional offices, many of the buildings in which our regional offices are located. But that's a good point. I mean, that's something I will go check on.
And if they call and they can't get you, they're going to call our office to find out. So if they call your office to get an update about claims, what will happen?
Our National Call Center will be taking calls, and they're going to be up and running for just that reason.
But not the regional offices?
The regional offices will be much reduced, and my sense is they will be fully engaged in receiving and date stamping claims, and they won't be running a call center out of the regional offices.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for what you're trying to do to make the most of a bad situation. I can only imagine that the challenges you're facing are much greater than those that you have even outlined for us here today because of this unnecessary shutdown. Thank you.
Mr. Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shinseki, for being here today. Thank you for your service to our country and to our nation's veterans. Want to start by giving a shout out to the Waco Regional Office. I visited with them several times over the last 2 years, and they were making remarkable progress on taking care of their disability backlog, and Director Lempos and the team there have done an outstanding job. I, just like you, am very concerned about the impact that this shutdown could have on their operations and what could potentially happen to our veterans. So I have a couple of questions in that regard. The first one is, why is the GI Bill hotline closed when other VBA hotlines remain open?
Say that again. Why is the GI
Why is the GI Bill hotline closed when other VBA hotlines remain open?
The one hotline I know will remain open is our Veterans Crisis Hotline. That is funded by the Health Administration.
Okay. I'm talking about the call center in Muskogee.
Call center.
The call center in Muskogee is apparently closed.
I'll go and, if you permit, try to provide you a better answer on exactly which ones are open.
That'll be fine. You can follow up. The next question is fairly simple, but it's going to take a little bit of time to give you the background so we can build up to it. And it goes back a few months, starting with the newer information that says that the White House had some involvement in the IRS targeting of certain groups. And then it builds from there by saying that the Park Service has said that they've been told to make it as tough on Americans as possible during this shutdown period. So, again, that doesn't have anything to do with you or me right now, but back on September the 19th, this committee held a hearing, and it had Assistant Secretary Joan Mooney, and I asked her a question about whether or not the Office of Congressional Legislative Affairs had ever been influenced by the White House in terms of its responses to Congress. She replied at that time that they had not. But then she sent me a follow-up letter a few days later, and she said that sometimes that the White House does intervene on correspondence between the VA and Congress. So again, this is still setting up the background for this information. And then if you go through the timeline of activities that we've seen recently, there was a field guide that was issued on Friday, September the 27th. The VA stated that disability claims processing would not be affected. Then on September the 28th, the VA notified the House Veterans Affairs Committee that they would not be able to send the November benefit checks because funding would run out in late October. You've confirmed that today, so there's nothing new there. But then on September the 30th, President Obama had an interview, and he stated that veterans, and I quote, "veterans will find their support centers unstaffed," which was a direct contradiction of the field guide that said that the vet centers would not be affected from a couple of days earlier. And then in that same interview, the president also intimated that the shutdown would affect somebody in a VA office who's counseling one of our vets who's got PTSD. On October the 1st, the VA updated the field guide, or it was amended to add that the end-of-month caveat to benefits payment bullet in the original field guide. Then yesterday I get the news that the Waco regional office has had to lay off a third of its staff, or furlough a third of its staff. So again, this goes back to my question, which is fairly simple, and that is, did someone at the White House or the Office of Management and Budget or the Treasurer or any other federal agency or any other federal employee ask you or anyone else in the Veterans Administration to modify the timetable under which the VA was going to begin its operational wind down, if you will, to deal with the lapse in appropriations?
Fair enough. I think if your perspective is that there is the ability to reach in and understand and influence how we operate, I would say it's just the opposite. Now, look, we are faced with an unusual event. A shutdown of government doesn't occur frequently, and we have no good plans in place. We had to go back and look at what happened in '96 to have some idea what the requirements were going to be. At the same time, we have a 13 closeout, and you know, if on the 5th of September, whenever Ms. Mooney testified, if someone had said, we're going to shut the government down, I will guarantee you between the 5th of September and 30th of September, there would have been actions that I would have perhaps taken differently. That didn't become obvious to us until the last week, maybe Wednesday of the last week of September. And then we had to do these assessments. And if your complaint is that we our predictions changed over time.
Let me reclaim my time for just a minute. I'm not complaining. I was asking a simple question, whether or not the White House had any influence over the timetable for the VA shutdown process. I think you've answered it no.
Yeah,
and
no.
I just want to say,
the answer is no.
I'm glad to hear that answer. You and I both agree that I think that, well, let me rephrase that. I think most of us in here agree that the House has done its work by passing two appropriations bills that would deal with this issue. One is the Milcon VA bill, which would fully fund the VA, and we wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion today. Also, we passed H.J. Res 72 last week, which would fund the VA so that we wouldn't have this conversation. Both those bills passed on a bipartisan basis, so I would urge those folks that are listening to this hearing to be sure to influence the Senate to take up on those two bills. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brown, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Let me be clear. I keep hearing the Senate, the Senate. I put the responsibility straight here with the House. We could pass a clean CR, and you would not be sitting there. And I have done my entire career all I could do that veterans would not be caught up with the House and the Senate. And I don't blame the Senate. I thank God for the Senate, the bad politics of this House. And at some point, you know, let's don't confuse nobody with facts. Now, we're talking about November 1. I want to talk about October the 17th. If we do not pass uh, the full faith and credit, if we default, what will happen to all of the mothers and the spouses and the TRICARE and the checks that go out, period, for the VA? Period. Tell us what's going to happen when these people in the House let us default on our credit. What happens to the VA? And the people that's been talking to me aren't employees. They're contractors. And the contractors are not going to get any back pay. And they're being laid off in droves because the government is not effective and the House is responsible. They could pass a clean CR. For the first time ever in the history, I voted against a VA bill because it was $6 billion less than what we passed out of here. So now, please respond.
Well, Congresswoman, I would just repeat what the President's pointed out. What he looks to the Congress to do is two things. One, provide a budget so we can operate as a government, and two, pay the bills that have already been incurred. And both of those issues are at play here. I am looking for a budget, and so is the rest of the government, so we can do what we're charged to do. And then paying the bills is the issue, the debt ceiling, and that those are authorizations that have already occurred. And
but what happens on the 17th if we default? What happens to the VA? Will the veterans ask me, will they get their checks?
Congresswoman, I am planning to operate as long as I can this month. But at a certain point here in days, I'll begin to furlough people. And that'll have to do with my inability to continue to operate under the carryover. And so whatever occurs with the discussions of debt ceiling, I imagine will be even worse. But beginning here in days to weeks before the end of this month, for the most part, VA will be reduced in operations. My office will be 90% shut down. My office, legislative affairs with whom you deal frequently, will be down to one person. Public affairs down to one person. And then for the rest of our operation, other than receiving claims and looking after families that are expecting us to provide the appropriate burial services, all of that will be reduced.
So I just want to be clear. I want you to know this is a self-imposed disaster on the veterans and on the country. There is no need as we sit here. I mean, the Senate and the President had agreed to the poor levels of the House. They've agreed to it. Clean CR and we could move forward. But yet we have people that want to blame the Senate, want to blame the President. At 20 minutes to 12, we want a conference. It was over. The House is inept. And I've been in here for 22 years, and I have never seen anything like the people that serve in this House that want to act like they care about the veterans. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. They're out at the cemeteries or out at the memorial saying, oh, we don't know why it's shut down. Well, you voted to shut it down a few hours earlier. This is a sad state of affairs. This committee used to be bipartisan. And now you got a few members that's dragging the House of Representatives down, the People's House. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has completed. And for the members of this committee and those that may be listening today, the continuing resolution that the House actually put on the floor that has been berated by a couple of members saying that it was less than folks wanted by $6 billion, was exactly the same piece of legislation that Senator Sanders filed Monday night. And so folks that are out there saying we shouldn't do this by piecemeal, Senator Sanders, along with Ms. Hirano, Mr. Begich, Mr. Tester, and Mr. Blumenthal, which coincidentally held a news conference at the very same time we've been having this hearing with the Secretary, to say that we should not be using him as a punching bag. Mr. Secretary, I trust that we have not used you as a punching bag today. We are trying to get the information out to the veterans, and again, you have talked in depth about those things that we will not be able to do. But my question, how many employees within VA will still be on the job after November 1st if this shutdown continues?
Sure. Again, Mr. Chairman, let me take that one for the record to give you the specificity that you're looking for. As I say, there are still factors coming together to tell me how long I operate. I've told you that the mandatory funds are expected to be depleted before the end of this month, affecting both the 1 November checks, affecting a VBA in large measure. Their present workforce of about 13,000 people will be severely reduced. We'll be down to about 1,100 and roughly 1,000 people in VBA. So we will have people functioning in VBA. NCA will likewise have to furlough a significant portion of their workforce and will go to modified operations. VHA is fully funded. And so when you look at the account, it'll look very large, but that's because VHA is about 80% of our workforce and our budget.
Mr. Chairman.
But I do think it's important to remember that, you know, your total employees are about 335,000. And so when we talk about numbers of 10,000, 4,000, those are big numbers. But as it relates to the overall number of 335, I would appreciate, and you've already said that you would take it for the record, I would appreciate you getting that information to us.
Mr. Chairman, I have just a quick question
The
for
chair
you.
does not recognize the gentlelady from Florida. Her time has expired.
I have a question, Mr.
Secretary.
Chairman, on the question that you was asking the Secretary.
Madam-
You're asking
Madam-
the number of employees. My question is, how many people that receive checks will not be getting those checks? I think that's a bigger question.
Again, the gentlelady is not recognized for her question, and I appreciate what she's asking. But, you know, we knew that the possibility of this some time ago. I don't believe anybody in this room wanted to be where we are today. Do you believe the same thing, Mr. Secretary?
You know, from my background, I would say you look at all the options. This was not one I believed would happen. I just didn't think the august members of this committee or the Congress would allow this to happen. So I had plans, and we have quickly dusted them off, and within 72 hours, gone into emergency procedures to continue to take care of veterans as long as we could, and then ensure the orderly shutdown of our activities, so we're taking care of our people as well. Mr. Chairman, if you knew the shutdown was going to happen, it wasn't shared with me. Yes, you always look at the possibilities. I just didn't think you would allow this to happen.
And I think most members of this committee would say that we do not want to be here. This was not an intended consequence, but we are here. And we've asked you to come in and talk to us. And my question, I guess, is at what point did you start doing extraordinary measures to prepare for this and begin to scale back some expenditures so that you would not be perceived as making foolish expenditures of funds that may be necessary. And you probably can gather where I'm going with this question, and
No,
I
I don't
well,
gather where you're going.
how did we end up with the $500,000 worth of art
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that.
in Kansas? Why have we been spending over $1 million in the Washington, D.C. area on PR ads? Again, I think those that are being furloughed want these questions asked. It's not a political question. It's a question as to prioritization, because we're talking about people not getting the benefits that they've earned, that not being able to be buried in a timely fashion, yet we can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on things that probably the general public would think were inconsequential to taking care of our veterans.
Yeah. You raised artwork, and I think the suggestion that this was year-end spending, that's not the case. There were 3 facilities that have been in the process of being constructed and or major refurbishment. In the case of the Miami facility, it's an 843,000 square foot facility, 11 floors. Major renovations in this facility hadn't been done since the 1980s, and that project is completed. And part of the project was to replace wall hangings, photographs, prints that add to that environment that says it's a healing environment and welcoming to veterans. West Los Angeles, a 16,000 square foot facility in which homeless and mental health clinics have been provided. And then the Jacksonville community-based outpatient clinic, a new construction project, 102,000 square feet, and needed to be outfitted. All total, about 1,400, a little over 1,400 wall hangings, photographs, prints, pictures of veterans, pictures of local scenery that veterans in that area would recognize. I think artwork is probably an inappropriate description here. I think the average cost is under $400, all expenses included. Those were part of the project, and they were funded and part of the execution. You know, if there was a way to have anticipated the shutdown and redirected some of those monies, I probably would have done it. But again, I say that it's not until the last week in September that it was clear that what was going to happen would happen. And we went into emergency procedures.
And I apologize for not recognizing Mr. McNerney for your question. Thank you for your indulgence, and you're recognized.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman Miller, and also Ranking Member Michaud, for inviting me to the committee hearing, and the other members of the committee for not objecting. It's good to be back here. It's a great committee. This is a terrible hearing, though, to make that happen. So I do want to say the situation is dire. On November 1st, we're going to cut off hundreds of thousands of disability recipients, students that are depending on GI Bill, families whose veterans or active service members who have died. I think American public needs to know the dire situation. We're going to be sending hundreds of thousands of people into a dire straits, maybe making them homeless, and there's no excuse. We need to solve this problem, and we need to solve it in the next week. I do have some specific questions. Mr. Secretary, in addition to Mr. Denham, my colleague and neighbor, I'd like to know from you about the impact of the shutdown on the French Camp project. I'd like to know specifically its priority, and I'll take that offline. Now, as you know, the Veteran Service Organization's staff members, the VSO staff members, use the VA regional offices to help counsel veterans, but VSO staff members are not members, are not employees of the VA. Could the VA allow them to continue to use the facilities? I understand a lot of them are shut out from the facilities, can they continue to use those facilities to help counsel our veterans?
I'm told that we're not allowed to do that, but again, this is day-to-day assessment. We go back and check to make sure that the interpretation of the law is clear. But these are some pretty well-defined rules that we operate under. The Anti-Deficiency Act has provisions for two categories. One is protection of life and property, and the other one is necessary implication.
Well, are there any other functions that the VSOs normally perform that they're not able to perform now?
We'll look for every opportunity to help them be successful in their mission. It's part of our mission as well. But frankly, we are trying to process as many claims as we can before the mandatory account is depleted. And then thereafter, we're into receiving and date stamping claims.
Well, you said, I believe, that the VA processing claims are continuing. Are there decisions being made about these claims? And if so, are the veterans being notified about those decisions, or is that on hold?
In those circumstances where we are able to pay, and I described the retroactive aspects of this, we won't be able to pay continuing monthly benefits. But for those veterans who have a date stamp that goes back some time, when that is awarded, we try to pay the retroactive portion of that. The monthly cycle picks up in November. And
so they'll be notified if the decision is made, even if they're not able to get the check?
Well, they'll be notified if we are able to pay the retroactive aspect of that, and then we will process the remainder of the claim and put that in the line. For students who are currently in school, I think I answered a question earlier that says that as long as we have mandatory funds remaining, we will honor as many of those requests as we can, but those all draw the mandatory account down, and before the end of the month, it'll be depleted, and then we will look to furlough the workforce that has been doing that.
Are the prescription drug benefits being impacted? Veterans' prescription drug benefits?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Are the veterans' prescription drug benefits being impacted by the shutdown?
Prescriptions, Veterans Health Administration is fully funded, and so medications are available and will be filled.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Backus. Do you have any other questions? Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more question, Mr. Secretary. My Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee uncovered that the VA cybersecurity protection measures were inadequate, even when the VA has been fully funded before the shutdown. In fact, the investigation discovered numerous occurrences when foreign state-sponsored hackers infiltrated the VA network. How has the shutdown affected the private information of veterans and their families? Are these 20 million individuals in the VA system now at even greater risk?
Congressman, I will tell you that of what we know, we will have the ability to respond to what we know, but there's, as you would expect, more to this than sometimes even we're able to know. So we do take steps to assure the security of our system. Every event better prepares us for the next, and we are active here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Michaud, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up question, Mr. Secretary. You had mentioned about the delays and the overtime you already had in the original budget you presented to Congress, as well as anticipating, I think it was $40 million to carry over for next year's budget. Since you've utilized that $40 million, you can't carry it over, and since the delays have caused the backlog to creep back up again, will you be requesting an additional supplemental to deal with replacing that $40 million, as well as more overtime money to get you back where you have to be as far as the backlog?
I think the basic question is, am I going to try to reconstitute that $40 million? I will find every way I can internal my accounts, and if I'm not able to do that, and I need to look for support here to get that funding in place to be able to get veterans the care they need, I will seek it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Huelskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to take a note, a little bit of time. I'd like to apologize to anybody in this committee that might have been offended by my trying to find out exactly why the U.S. Senate has not voted on these appropriations. I do appreciate the bipartisan nature of this committee, but I think we all agree here that our veterans should not be used as pawns in this particular debate, and I appreciate the work in terms of the Secretary. But the language that reference to the individual in the Senate that I asked a question about has used some language that I don't think anybody in this committee has used. Has not called anybody an anarchist or a fanatic or insane. That's the language we hear coming out of here, and it does no service to our veterans. So I apologize if any took offense at trying to figure out why we have not seen a vote in that. I would appreciate Secretary continuing to try to work with the Senate, encourage them to bring that to a vote. I'm pretty confident, based on what we hear here, that that could go right to the Senate and keep your doors open, or to the President, keep those doors open. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huelskamp. We've asked the other members if they have any. Mr. Ruiz, do you have a question? Sorry, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Ruiz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Shinseki. Thank you for your service to our country. The government shutdown has caused a crisis that could have been avoided had Congress simply worked together to put people ahead of politics and solutions above ideology. It is unconscionable that Congress continues to put political gamemanship above the needs of our veterans. The best way to help veterans in my district and across the country is to end this reckless shutdown. Now that the VA is required to furlough thousands of employees, how will that affect the veterans claims backlog and constituents, specifically in my district, meaning how will furloughs impact the LA regional office and the San Diego regional office, which review claims for veterans in my district?
Congressman, as I indicated earlier, our availability of carryover funding for 2013, roughly $40 million, we exhausted that on 7 October and then had to furlough about 7,800 people. We have about 13,000 regional benefits employees who are doing what they always do, and that's, process claims as quickly and as accurately as they can. With the end of mandatory overtime, we are doing that at 1,400 claims each day less than we were doing, before 30 September. So there's a cumulative effect here. These employees will continue to work until such time as something we call the mandatory account that currently has some residual funds in. They will continue to process claims until that point. And where we can pay for a retroactive claim or for a student claim, we will continue to do that. But as we do that, we draw down the mandatory account. When the mandatory account is exhausted before the end of this month, then the vast majority of these people will also be furloughed. And that will begin to have a great impact on the backlog. Today, the backlog is already 2,000 higher than it was on 30 September, so it's already beginning to have an effect.
Well, I want you to know that I will continue to advocate for a pragmatic solutions so that we can open our doors specifically for our veterans. My office in the district has not shut down. We have extended hours, and we're even working weekends if a veteran needs it to come and pick up that mantle because the mantle that has been dropped by this ridiculous shutdown. And we will be there for our veterans, and I look forward to collaborating with you so that once we open our doors, those veterans that have been ill-affected by this will have expedited, prioritized treatment so that we can continue to serve the veterans to the best of our abilities.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your service to our country, and thank you very much.
Thank you. That's my intent as well, Congressman.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. I'd like to recognize for a final question, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I would like, before I ask my question, the 4 service organizations sent a letter to Congress not supporting the piecemeal VA bill on the floor. And so is it possible that I could submit that to the record?
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, because, you know, to talk about what a senator introduced, I don't want to talk about the Senate. I want to talk about the House of Representatives, where I serve. And Mr. Secretary, my question to you is, come November or the 3rd week in October, will 3.8 million veterans not get their checks in the mail? Benefits, that's a nice thing, but checks is what they live on. Most veterans that get those checks are on fixed income. Explain to me how they're supposed to make it.
Congresswoman, effective 1 November, if we don't resolve this, those veterans will not receive pension, compensation for veterans who are in school, their education checks, vocational rehab, and those beneficiaries are not just veterans. That's 3 million veterans, but when you add surviving spouses and children, you know, it's over 5 million individuals who will be involved. I mean, this is serious, and I'm hoping that the leadership of this committee will help us resolve it.
And thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know, I was told that the House, somebody fed them some snake oil. So I went home and tried to find snake oil. I think it's just in Texas. So I did look for some holy oil, and I did bring some back. But this is not a joke. This is very serious. Veterans have come up to me in church Sunday, because that's the only place I went Sunday, 2 services, and I needed more. And they wanted to know about their benefits. And I told them, as of October the 17th, if we default, they will not get their benefits. And I told the Social Security people the same thing. You know, is this true? Will they not get their benefits? Is this a game?
That's not a game, Congresswoman. There are veterans and service members, families, children counting on us. And they expect us to deliver.
Well,
5 million of them will be impacted here severely.
I hope there is some leadership on this committee that will work with the leadership in the House and come up with a clean, continuing resolution, because the problem that we have is that so many of the people that's been furloughed, they're contract people. They will not get back pay. And many of them are veterans. Do you all have contracted employees also?
We do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here again on short notice and for over 2.5 hours. We appreciate you taking the questions. We do have other questions that we'll submit to you for the record. And in particular, I want to ask that you help this committee in furthering a bill that was passed out of this committee in a 100% bipartisan fashion. That is advance funding for the remainder of VA's budget so that we don't get into this type of situation anymore. All members will have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks. Mr. Secretary, thank you. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Sorry you're in this position. How you doing, man? Guys, I feel really good. I did 7 miles this morning. Done 10. I know. I had a very good. Thank you. Sorry. No, I'm going to talk to him later on. Good night. All right.
Thanks for all you do. Thank you very much.